one thing I have focused on since the origination of this channel is basically this YouTube playlist that I have here called my favorite science fiction television series. And it's not something I do every week. I add to it over time. It gets added to as I remember things and as I watch new shows and so on and so forth. And we were discussing the Stargate revival potential the other day, whether it's better to do a reboot or a revival of the Stargate franchise. And people were talking about intellectual properties and it's just come up a lot in the Rings of Power conversation about why can't more production companies and distributors focus on original intellectual properties because it is a risk, but sometimes it pays off. And somebody mentioned Sanctuary, which I had completely forgotten about this show with Amanda Tapping from um, Stargate SG-1. It also has a slew of other people in it. This show was freaking amazing. I'll get into the cast here in a few minutes, but one of the things I completely forgot about the show, but one of the things I loved about this is that yeah, the visual effects were a little cheesy. It was a Sci-Fi Channel production, which means special effects were not the number one priority. The acting is pretty good. It's just a fun storyline that had some decent lore to it, and they played fast and loose with some existing characters like Nikola Tesla and Frankenstein and Bigfoot and other lore and mythology of creatures from over the years. But overall, it was just a really fun television production, and it was kind of interesting for the time that it came out because it was almost all filmed on green screen. And if I remember correctly, Mantabity took instead of taking a paycheck as an actress, I think she just took a producer's credit or producer's salary and forewent her actor's salary because she wanted to be kind of the driving force behind the show. I could be wrong on that. We're going to be diving into the wiki here in a few minutes. This September is not true. This is a trailer from I think the season 3 DVD. Oh, Ryan Robinson. Oh man, the cast of this show was amazing. Let's just dive into this really quick because it had some really cool lore behind it. Basically, the principle is that Dr. Helen Magnus, played by Amanda Tapping, is on a quest to protect various cryptids, legends, and abnormal animals and people with certain extraordinary powers and abilities, which most people would consider monsters. She heads the Sanctuary Network, which consists of large facilities known as sanctuaries scattered throughout the world, serving as safe havens for the abnormals. She's initially aided in her quest by her reluctant protege, Will Zimmerman, played by Robin Dunn, her intrepid, if somewhat reckless daughter Ashley, played by Amelie, if I pronounce that right, Ullerup, the talkative geek, and lycanthrope Henry Foss, who played by none other than one of my favorite Canadian actors, Ryan Robbins, a computer security expert, and her taciturn-like assistant, played by Christopher Heyerdahl. So Christopher Heyerdahl, excuse me, played multiple roles in this show. Not only did he play her assistant, he also played, which her assistant, I guess, was like, he was never named, but listed as Bigfoot in the show's credit. He also played Magnus's ex-lover, John Druitt. And it got multiple seasons. I don't remember that it got canceled or if it just eventually. Dun, dun, dun. Yeah, it got canceled after its fourth season. I couldn't remember, but it started in what 2008 and ran until 2012. So it did get four runs, four seasons, and it had 8, 13, 13, 20, and 13 episodes across its run. So not huge, other than the third season. The third season had quite a bit of a run, but the storyline was what made it really interesting to me, and the way they took some of these unique characters like Tesla and Bigfoot and monsters and myths and legends and so on and so forth. So, as an example, during season one, they kind of unveil the history slowly, and we find out that she was part of a group of experimental scientists known as the Five, which included Nikola Tesla, Nigel Griffin, Dr. James Watson, and her lover John Druitt, who all wanted to push their understanding of the physical world through unconventional means. Says here, at some point during their partnership, Magnus acquired a vial of untainted vampire blood and used it in a serum that they injected into themselves, which allowed them to develop abnormal traits. Magnus experienced slowed aging and longevity with no clear limit. Nigel became invisible at will. Dr. James Watson intellect became heightened. Tesla became a vampire with the additional power of electrical manipulation, and Don Druitt became able to teleport through time and space, as well as gaining longevity, but became unstable and then eventually became possessed. and became known as Jack the Ripper. So they introduced characters like Dr. James Watson and Jack the Ripper and vampires with electrical power and Nikola Tesla and so on and so forth, which I think was just a great way to play around with existing legend and lore. And then in episode 3 of the first season, we got introduced to the Cabal, which was this other organization that captured studies and experiments in the abnormals because they view them as a threat to the human species, whereas in the sanctuary, they protect them. Um, they get into season 2. Magnus is grappling with denial and grief, and finally accepts that her, you know, daughter has been lost, or thinks their daughter's been lost. And we get a new character who's a former freelance Cabal operative. There's more relationships showing up in the second season with the 5 original founders. There's more stuff about the Cabal attacking the Sanctuary Network, and then there's other stuff that's going on. And we meet other Sanctuary heads, including Terrence Wexford, who's played by Paul McGillian, who we also, if I remember correctly, this is the other guy from Stargate. Yes, it's another guy from Stargate from Atlantis, who eventually attempts to kill Magnus. Season 3 was the big season. Um, we get lots more supernatural stuff happening in season 3. Uh, it just goes back into the history. We get a lot of, going flashbacks and moving forward. We get to meet this steampunk style city, which is the Praxis, which is this like advanced underground civilization of humans and abnormals, which was a lot of fun, by the way. That story arc, it's pretty cool. And then in the 4th season, we get even more stuff happening, and then we get the Sanctuary Network getting, having their ties to the UN cut off, all this other stuff, and they basically have to go underground. And then there's the Hollow Earth abnormals who refuse to stay underground, and they start doing these terrorist activities. So there's a whole lot of stuff that happens over the course of these. And then as we get to the end of season 4, we also meet this additional characters, and they start this new Edenic underground city based on the works of Brockmeister Fuller and Albert Einstein. So just overall, this is the most important thing. All of what I just read above, if you notice, apart from some named characters, they're part of the public, um, what the public has access to, like what Dr. Watson, Nikola Tesla, Jack the Ripper. These are in the public and not under copyright or anything like that. So it's free to use these characters in your literary works. Um, they took those original characters and put their own unique spin on them, and then made this entire show out of an original IP and an original storyline, and it worked. But here's the thing: it only worked because it was done on a budget, on a production, on a channel that was not putting a lot of money into it. It was filmed almost entirely on green screen with 0 elaborate sets built. Um, The first season cost an estimated 21 million, which is very, very low budget, especially when you look at how, and that's Canadian 21 million, which is less in US dollars. Especially looking at shows like Game of Thrones, which cost like $20 million per episode. So an entire season of Sanctuary cost what one episode of the House of the Dragon cost for Game of Thrones. Um, so on and so forth. It was exclusively filmed with red camera technology, so it was all shot on digital. The original distribution for Sanctuary was originally the internet. Episodes were sold directly to viewers on the official website. These webisodes were about 15-20 minutes in duration, were released bi-weekly. Then the success of the webisodes led to the Sci-Fi Channel commissioning that 13-episode season for 2008, which is very, very interesting. Those 4 webisodes were then rewritten and reshot, and after their deal with Sci-Fi Channel, those were moved on and on. So it's a really interesting production cycle because it wasn't like a traditional one. Said here, along with being a primary cast member and Tapping is also executive producer on the show, but according to Tapping herself in an interview, she says she does not get paid extra as an executive producer, mainly because what salary the executive producer would get goes instead towards paying for the sets because the series is not backed by a studio. What salary the executive producer would go towards paying for the set? So it was in reverse. It wasn't that she didn't take a salary for her acting position. It was that she didn't take it for her executive producer. So It's very interesting. All in all, great show. Proof that it can be done. However, again, extremely budget oriented because it was done for a lot less than what prestige television costs. Which is why people will often say things like, "Oh, you know, why wouldn't Amazon just do a big budget television show based on an original IP?" Because it's a risky venture. Because in order to justify that sort of an expenditure, you're going to need to guarantee that you're going to have like huge numbers of viewership, be able to sell the advertising dollars or to generate subscriptions or whatever it's going to take to pay for the investment on the back end. They could get away with it and also have it run for 4 seasons, despite the fact that viewership was not that great overall. I don't know if they actually show the actual numbers here. I don't think they do. Yes, US million in viewers. So it went from, had 2.7 million, dropped to 1.5, and then just kept dropping until, during season 3, we see, 500,000, 600,000 at one point. And then it looks like the average is about 1.2 to 1.5 million across the span of its run. 1.5 million people is not a lot in the grand scope of things, and that's why they were able to get away with running for 4 seasons because it didn't need a lot because it didn't cost a lot to produce. Other shows require a lot more viewership. I mean, you want shows like Game of Thrones, House of the Dragon, so on and so forth. I mean, they're wanting 20, 30 million per episode minimum to have that show be considered worthwhile and, worthy of success. Food for thought. Anyway, love this show. I had completely forgotten about this show until it came up in the conversation the other day around the Stargate revival slash reboot thoughts and processes. Anyway, love to hear your thoughts if you watched Sanctuary, what you thought of it. Drop them down below. Don't forget to like, subscribe, hit that bell icon, and support the channel with a membership or a super thanks on this video or super chats on live streams. Don't forget about the Patreon page. I'll see everybody in the next episode. Peace.